Hello and welcome. My name is Frank Fischer, and in this little nibble here, I want to introduce you to the 3 things that we from DeepCode currently find the most in Vue projects out in the internet. Okay, so without any further ado, let's dive right into it. I have 3 things that I want to show you. I will show you a concrete example. I will show you a kind of a demo project I did, very simple thing to show you how this looks like in code and how you should, make it better. I will also show you some resources that give you further details on what we are talking about here, so that if you want to research it any further, you can actually use these resources. Okay, so let's get into it. Number 1 is actually this one here. And it says the property count in our example here should be declared with a simple type and not a number. If you want to assign it a value as well, use count, type number, default number. So what is this talking about here? So within VueJS, you have property types. And as you can see, there are like a variety of different types that you can assign. And I think this is a nice example where VueJS is actually leveraging the power of TypeScript to give this kind of an extra information to the runtime in what you intend to see here in this property. So what you see here is we have string, we have number, boolean, and things like that more. And there's a good reason why you should do this, because with this, Vue is actually in the situation to check the type that you expect to have here with the type that actually comes in. So especially if you are using your component or you're handing on your component to somebody else and somebody else is using this component, with this you have an easy way to ensure that the type of the property that you get is actually the type that you expect. So let's have a look in the source code, and as you can see here, this is in my little source code the repetition of what we've seen in the example there, and you see it's the exact same error message that we get here. And the idea, instead of this, and this is exactly what the error message said, instead of having a simple number here, say type number and give it a default value. So as you can see here, what I'm doing is I say this type is a number and the default shall be 0, which is exactly the same thing that we achieve up here. So we see this very, very often in Vue projects on GitHub and on other repo management systems. This is done wrong in a way very, very, very often. So this is number 1. Good, let's go to number 2. Number 2 is actually this one here. The validate might be a typo. You mean validator, question mark. So what you have in Vue is the opportunity to provide a validator to your property. So you cannot only define what type it has and the default value, you can also hand on a function that is actually called to check if the property is actually in the right dimension, so to say, in the right value space. And as you can see, this function shall be named validator. It's handed over one parameter, which is the incoming property. And you can come back and you can either say true or false. If you hand over a true or if you return a true, it's perceived as valid. If you return a false here, it's perceived as invalid, and a runtime error will be recorded. Again, let us have a look in the code. As you can see here, the same thing. I typed validate, and but the function needs to be validator. So I think this happens quite a lot. We see this quite a lot in the wild. And I think the reason behind it is that in most of these functions or function names that you find in Vue are actually like verbs. Yeah. So it's talking about a kind of situation in the lifetime. It's kind of a verb that is there. So validate seems to be a logical, so to say, selection. But in reality, it's not validate, it's validator. And so you get this kind of hint from our side here in saying, hey, maybe Yeah, you don't want to call this validate. Maybe you want to call it validator, because this is how Vue expects it. So this is number 2. Let's go to number 3. And this is an example for number 3. And as you can see, before create is, or created, before mount, these are functions that describe the lifetime of a component. So lifetime functions of a component. And it's literally following the lifetime of the component here. And as you can see, what the code tries here is to access the property EL in the lifecycle method before create. Now, EL is a bit specific here. If you look into the documentation, EL is actually the instance of an existing DOM element in which your Vue component is mounted into or mounted onto. And you can then access it via this variable. But the thing is that you need to be careful because this variable is available, as it says here, after the instance is mounted. So if we go to our code here, what you see is if I have it in before create, it actually say the lifecycle method before create should not use property L because it's not yet initialized. So before create is actually too early in the lifecycle of the component, as that this element already exists here. And as you can see, DeepCode literally, saw this this variable being used here and understood that within this function, the lifecycle of the component is not in the situation that EL is already initialized. So you cannot use it in this situation. And this is actually number 3 that we find the most often on Vue projects out in the internet. So what I wanted to show you was these 3 things and how to actually mitigate them. Here, just use the right construction. Here, use validator instead of validate. And here, be aware before create, you don't have access to the EL environment variable. Thanks for watching, but now it's your turn. Go to deepcode.ai and check out what DeepCode can do for your code.